I remember a day, years ago, when I stood at a crossroads in my life. I was still trying to find my footing, just a young man from Mount Vernon with big dreams, but no clear sense of how to reach them. I was unsettled, running from audition to audition, full of excitement one moment and crushed disappointment the next. In the middle of that confusion, I visited my mother's beauty shop. Oh, yeah. It was a busy afternoon, loud with gossip and laughter, and the hiss of hairdrying. While I was waiting for her to finish with a client, an older woman I'd never met before walked up to me. She studied my face as though searching for something. Then she told me, "Young man, you are going to speak to millions. You are going to influence generations. God has a purpose for you." She said it so firmly, so confidently, that I felt a chill run down my spine. In that moment, I realized there was something bigger at work, some presence I couldn't explain but also couldn't deny. That day, I started to wonder if I would spend my life not just chasing an acting career, but trusting that God was guiding every step of my journey. Now I stand before you, seeing so many faces looking right back at me, some of you brimming with hope, some weighed down by fear, some of you halfway between the two. And I want to ask you one question. When the storms come, where do you place your trust? Because, let's be honest, storms always come. They come in the shape of financial hardships, unexpected losses, broken relationships, or moments when you feel utterly alone in this world. I've been there too. I've seen the heartbreaks, the closed doors, the times I questioned my own worth. Yet through it all, one thing has kept me standing: a genuine, growing trust in God's plan for my life. And I know that if you cultivate that trust, if you feed it, water it, and choose it daily, especially in times of adversity, it will transform your struggles into stepping stones. It will give you a kind of confidence that no worldly success can match. The reason this topic matters isn't because I think we should throw ourselves into blind faith without questions or challenge. It matters because real faith, faith that's tested by fire, opens us to the profound, unshakable understanding that we are not alone. We never have been, and we never will be. When you trust God, you start to see your trials in a different light. Every hardship, every sleepless night, every tear in private becomes a moment to lean more deeply into divine strength. And once you've tasted that kind of peace, you won't settle for temporary fixes. You'll know that real power in this world doesn't come from our own capabilities, but from how we align our hearts with something much greater than ourselves. In my own life, I've watched how trusting God shaped my attitude toward success and failure. Early on, when I prayed for opportunities, I'd stand in line at auditions with my heart racing, thinking maybe this was the one. But when doors closed, I discovered that some of the greatest blessings come disguised as disappointments. It was in those low moments, when I had no choice but to keep believing, to keep praying, that I learned faith is not about everything working out perfectly on my timeline. It's about trusting that God's timeline is the perfect one, even when I can't see the big picture yet. And so, each rejection became a chance for me to refine my craft, to fortify my spirit, and to trust more deeply in a higher calling. Tonight, I want to share with you 9 dynamic moves, 9 steps that have guided me through adversity and helped me build a lasting, genuine trust in the Lord. These moves are not magic potions. They won't instantly make all your problems go away. Rather, they're lived principles that teach you to see adversity as an invitation to grow closer to God, to understand His voice, and to walk forward in confidence, knowing you're under His mighty protection. I'm going to break these moves down in a way that resonates with your personal journey, your family life, your business ventures, your community work, wherever you find yourself right now. And as we walk through these points, I'll ask questions. I'll invite you to think deeper, to answer silently or out loud, and to confront the places where it might feel hard to trust. Because real transformation doesn't come from passive listening. It comes from engaging, from wrestling with questions, from surrendering your pride, and from deciding that you are indeed ready to trust God, no matter the season you're in. So let's take this journey together. Let's open our hearts and let's walk side by side into a faith that doesn't waver when life gets tough, a faith that stands strong precisely because it's been tested and proven. Now I want to speak on the first three moves, which are all about laying that foundation. How do we even begin to plant our feet on solid ground when the winds of life are blowing hard? Let's dive deeper into these truths, and I promise if you listen with your heart, each principle will bring you closer to a peace that surpasses all understanding. Let me start by revealing the first move that changed everything for me. It's one that comes naturally to some, but to most of us it requires a little bit of humility and a lot of heart. Surrendering your burdens in prayer. Now, prayer might sound like a simple or obvious thing, but let me tell you, real prayer is not just reciting the same lines or checking a spiritual box. It is a conversation. It's an act of laying down every weight, every worry, every question about tomorrow, and trusting that God can handle them far better than we ever could on our own. In my early 20s, I was struggling with direction. I'd wake up in the morning anxious, feeling like I had to solve all my problems by 9 a.m. But when I committed to truly praying, pouring out my fears, frustrations, and doubts before God, the inner chatter began to quiet. It was like handing off a load that was too heavy for me to carry alone. Prayer became that place where I stopped pretending I had it all together, and where I learned to say, "Lord, I can't do this by myself. Lead me." If you've ever been so stressed that you couldn't sleep, you know exactly the weight I'm talking about. Maybe you've got a child who's hanging with the wrong crowd, and you feel powerless to protect them from bad influences. Maybe your small business is on the brink of failing, and you can't see a way to pay your employees next month. Or maybe you're simply lonely, looking at all the smiling faces online, and wondering why your heart feels so empty by comparison. In these moments, prayer isn't just a last resort. It becomes your first line of defense. You don't wait until things fall apart to cry out. You do it daily, consistently, as a way to remind yourself that you're connected to a source of strength so much greater than any obstacle you face. And the best part? You don't have to speak eloquent words or pray for hours on end. You simply have to come as you are, honest and real, trusting that God sees the sincerity of your heart more than the polish of your phrases. When I share this principle with younger people, I see their eyes light up, because young folks often live in a hyper-connected world but can feel deeply isolated. They're longing for authenticity, for a place to open up about the pressures they face, social pressures, academic pressures, the pressure to make it in a world that constantly tells them they're not enough. Prayer offers them the chance to be real with a God who loves them unconditionally. And for those of you raising families, prayer can be a bonding moment. Gather your spouse, your kids, your loved ones, and say a simple prayer of gratitude before meals, or when someone's going through a hard time. It doesn't have to be formal. Sometimes my family and I just hold hands, close our eyes, and say, "Lord, thank you for guiding us. Please continue to watch over us." It unites our spirits, reminds us of our shared faith, and strengthens those family ties more than any fancy vacation ever could. But prayer isn't passive, it prepares you for action. That leads us to the second move, reflecting daily on God's past faithfulness. I want you to think about a time in your life when things looked bleak, but somehow you made it through. Maybe it was a sickness that threatened to tear your family apart, or a financial crisis that had you on the verge of losing your home. Remember that moment, and think about how, in the midst of it, you probably felt panic, fear, or doubt. But here you are now. Perhaps you're still bearing scars, but you survived. In that survival lies proof of God's faithfulness. We often forget to look back and see how many battles we've already overcome. We get so stuck on the next problem that we fail to acknowledge the miracle of being here today, still standing, still able to praise and love and grow. This reflection is powerful. When I was first navigating Hollywood, I'd recall the day that woman in my mother's beauty shop told me I would speak to millions. Whenever I felt like giving up, when I heard no after no and started to wonder if I would ever get a real break, I'd remember that moment. It reminded me that God didn't bring me this far just to abandon me. And that's what I want you to realize. You have those same signposts in your own life. They might be hidden in your childhood, or in the story of your grandparents, or in a small act of kindness someone offered you when you were at your lowest. Every bit of grace you've experienced, every time you dodged a bullet or overcame a crisis, is a sign that God has carried you through. So take a moment, maybe at night, when the house is quiet, or early in the morning before the bustle of the day starts, and reflect. Write down 1 or 2 ways God has already shown up in your life. Do it daily if you can, because the more you remind yourself of who God has been, the more you'll trust who He will continue to be. This move applies just as much to business leaders and entrepreneurs. Whenever you're trying to innovate or break new ground, the journey can feel lonely. You might doubt your abilities. You might lose good team members. You might have a product launch that failed. But if you keep track of past victories, how you formed a great partnership, or turned a small idea into a functioning enterprise, you'll maintain the perspective that God can and will do it again. If He granted you success once, He can do it again, perhaps in a way you haven't even envisioned yet. Reflecting on past faithfulness isn't about living in the past. It's about letting the past fuel your faith for the future. Now let's talk about the third move, surrounding yourself with a faith-filled community. Trust me when I say you can't do this journey alone. People often ask, Denzel, you seem so grounded in your beliefs. How do you maintain that? And I tell them, I don't maintain it alone. Growing up, I had mentors, family members, pastors, teachers who kept me aligned with my values. When I got older, I stayed connected to that support system of believers, of people who were not afraid to tell me the truth, who would call me out if I drifted from my principles. In times of adversity, your community becomes your backbone. They pray for you. When you can't find the words, they remind you of God's promises when you're close to forgetting them, and they celebrate victories alongside you because they've invested in your struggle. In today's world, it's easy to become isolated. We rely on digital connections and can lose that real face-to-face fellowship that nurtures trust in God. I encourage you to seek out or build that community. Maybe it's a weekly Bible study or a small group of friends who talk about spiritual growth. Perhaps it's a volunteer organization where you serve together, or just one other person you pray with on a regular basis. Be intentional. And if you're a parent, teach this value to your kids. Show them the importance of having uplifting friends who won't drag them down paths they're not meant to travel. When adversity hits, and it will, having a circle of people who also rely on God is one of the greatest assets you can have. They'll help hold you steady when the wind tries to knock you off your feet. These first 3 moves, surrendering in prayer, reflecting on God's faithfulness, and surrounding yourself with faithful community, form the core foundation of trust. Without them, it's like trying to build a house on quicksand. You need that foundation first if you're going to stand firm during life's earthquakes. But we're just getting started, because once you lay that groundwork, the next moves are all about actively deepening and demonstrating that trust, even when the road gets bumpy. So let's keep going. Now we look at the 4th move, serving others in the midst of your own storm. This one is counterintuitive, because it seems like when you're facing hardship, you should preserve your energy and focus on fixing your own problems first. But I've learned that service is an act of faith. It says, my God can handle my situation, so I'm free to bless someone else. Think about it. If you really trust that God is taking care of you, then you don't have to spend every waking moment worrying about your own crisis. Instead, you can step out, help a neighbor, encourage a friend, or lend a hand to a stranger. And in doing so, you become a channel of God's love, which, in turn, increases your own sense of peace. I recall a time when I was in a serious career slump. Roles weren't coming in like they used to, and I felt a bit lost about my next steps. Rather than spend all day obsessively calling my agent, I decided to visit a local youth center. I started speaking to teens about discipline, about choosing the right path, about trusting God, even when you don't know what tomorrow holds. Those kids reminded me of myself, a bit unsure, a bit excited, trying to figure out who they would become. I poured into them, and by pouring into them, I realized I was pouring back into myself. My problems didn't magically vanish, but my perspective changed. My anxiety took a back seat because I was actively doing God's work. Serving taught me that trust in God is not about being idle. It's about stepping out of your comfort zone and focusing on what you can give, not just what you need to receive. This principle applies everywhere: families, communities, workplaces. Let's say you've got marital issues at home, and it seems like you and your spouse are always at odds. One approach might be to spend all your time complaining and pointing fingers. Another approach is to say, "You know what? Let me serve my spouse in some small, meaningful way. Let me do something kind or unexpected." That action is a demonstration of faith, a sign that you're trusting God to heal your relationship even as you make an effort to love sacrificially. Or perhaps you're leading a team at work and morale is low because of budget cuts. The situation is heavy. Instead of withdrawing, challenge yourself to serve your team, to boost their spirits, to recognize their efforts, to provide whatever resources you can to make their job easier. That act of service sends a signal that you trust there's a solution out there, and you're willing to step up and be part of it. The fifth move is speaking God's promises aloud. Words are powerful. They shape our reality. They can either tear down or build up our faith. I remember some of the first scriptures I memorized and how repeating them during times of doubt would calm my racing mind. Maybe you have a favorite verse or a comforting promise you lean on. Don't just keep it in your head. Say it out loud. Post it on your wall. Sing it. Write it down. When we proclaim God's promises over our lives, we're taking a stand, declaring that we refuse to be defined by our circumstances. We are instead defined by God's truth. I especially encourage young people to do this because your world is full of noise, negative news, online criticism, peer pressure. If you don't counteract those messages with the Word of God, you risk internalizing lies about who you are and what you can do. Parents, this is your chance to speak life into your children. Let them hear you say, "God has a plan for our family," or "We trust God to provide," or "We believe that God's love never fails." In the business world, I've seen CEOs open meetings with a word of faith, a short prayer or affirmation that sets the tone. It reminds everyone that their work is not just about profit margins. It's about stewarding gifts and resources responsibly, trusting that God will bless honest endeavors done with integrity. And there's a reason the Bible says that faith comes by hearing. When you speak these truths, your ears hear it, your spirit absorbs it, and your mind is renewed. Sixth move, maintaining gratitude in small things. Adversity has a way of zooming our focus in on what's going wrong. We find ourselves obsessing over every difficulty, every worst-case scenario, and we miss the little glimpses of God's grace woven into each day. But gratitude is like a lens that brings those blessings back into view. I started a gratitude journal at one point in my life when I was battling discouragement. Every day I wrote down just 3 things I was thankful for. Maybe it was a warm cup of coffee in the morning, or a call from a friend I hadn't heard from in a while, or simply the sunrise. Doing this shifted my perspective radically. I realized that even in my worst season, there was still much to appreciate: my health, my family, my mentors, the ability to pray and read God's Word. This act of noticing and acknowledging blessings, big or small, instills a deeper trust in God. If He cares about providing the small joys, then surely he's looking after the bigger battles as well. Gratitude is vital for family. It can change the atmosphere at home. Instead of complaining about chores or bills, take a moment, maybe during dinner, to have each family member share one thing they're grateful for that day. It doesn't take long, and it can dramatically alter the emotional climate in your household. In business settings, some leaders have learned to celebrate minor victories, even if the big goals are still a ways off. Celebrating a minor achievement keeps people motivated, keeps hope alive. This principle of small gratitude ensures that our hearts remain open to receiving more of God's goodness. When you thank Him for the little, you prepare yourself to handle more. Now, let's enter the seventh move, stepping out in faith with courageous action. You see, trust in God isn't just a warm, fuzzy feeling in your chest. It's an active stance that calls for obedience. Sometimes God places opportunities right in front of us, and our role is to take that leap, even if the future looks uncertain. Maybe it's going back to school to finish a degree. Maybe it's starting a community initiative you've always dreamed about. Maybe it's forgiving someone who deeply hurt you and making the first move toward reconciliation. Each of these actions requires faith, because you don't have any guarantee. But remember, faith is spelled R-I-S-K. You can't build a muscle without resistance, and you can't build trust in God without being willing to take steps that test your resolve. Early in my career, there were roles I wasn't sure I could handle. I didn't feel prepared, or I feared the critics wouldn't approve. But each time I prayed, I felt an inner prompting that said, "Take that role. Stretch yourself." So I did. And whether the outcome was good or bad, I learned something about myself and about God's sustaining power. Even in moments of public scrutiny, I sensed God telling me, "I've got you. Don't run from the spotlight if I'm calling you into it. Stand firm and let me show you how strong you are when you trust in me." And guess what? I discovered that in trusting God, I could weather not just success, but also failure, because my worth wasn't tied to the outcome. It was tied to who God said I was. Courageous action is equally relevant in the personal arena. If your marriage is on the rocks, it might take courage to attend counseling, to open up old wounds, and let them heal properly. If you're struggling with addiction, it might take courage to go to a rehab center, to confess your struggles to people who can help. These bold steps declare that you believe in a God who wants your healing more than you want to remain in your comfort zone. And once you take that step, you'll be amazed at how God meets you right where you are, often in ways you couldn't have orchestrated on your own. Eighth move, practicing forgiveness and letting go of resentment. Unforgiveness is like poison that we drink, hoping the other person gets sick. It hurts us more than it hurts the one who wronged us. Yet so many of us hold on to bitterness because we feel it protects us from being hurt again. But trusting God means entrusting your hurts to Him. It means believing that He is a just God, that He sees every tear, every betrayal, and He can heal the damage done to your heart. Forgiveness isn't about condoning bad behavior. It's about freeing yourself from the chains of hatred and fear. I've met countless individuals who carried grudges for years, sometimes against their own parents or siblings, only to realize that the bitterness ate away at their ability to trust God's redemptive power. When they finally let it go, an ocean of peace flooded their lives. I remember a close friend who was deeply betrayed in a business partnership. He lost a lot of money, and worse, he lost his sense of self-worth. For a while, all he talked about was how he'd been wrong. But eventually, he chose to forgive. He went to God, surrendered his pain, and asked for the strength to release that resentment. Amazingly, new opportunities opened up for him shortly afterward. He was able to enter new ventures without the cynicism that would have poisoned his judgment. That's the power of forgiveness. It clears the space in your heart so that new blessings can flow in. And yes, sometimes you might need to maintain healthy boundaries with someone who's repeatedly toxic. But even then, Forgiveness can reign in your heart as you trust God to handle the outcome and bring justice in His time. Finally, the ninth move. Believe in the renewal that comes after adversity. This is crucial because so often we get stuck in a mindset of perpetual struggle. We start to identify ourselves by our hardships. I'm the one who lost my job. I'm the one whose marriage failed. I'm the one who had that illness. But if you trust God, you must also trust that He has plans to restore, rebuild, and renew. There's something powerful about expecting good things, expecting victory, expecting that the sun will rise after the darkest night. It's not a naive positivity. It's a biblical principle that sorrow may last for the night, but joy comes in the morning. Adversity has its season, but it doesn't last forever. Unless we allow it to define us and keep us from moving forward. I've seen renewal in my own life over and over again. I've seen God turn rejections into redirections. I've witnessed how a closed door in one area became an open door in another. But renewal doesn't come if we refuse to take off the grave clothes of past defeat. We have to rise up, dust ourselves off, and say, "Okay, God, show me what you have for me now." This mindset shift can unlock fresh possibilities in your career, your family, your personal growth. It can reconcile old relationships or spark new ones. It can propel you into volunteer work or ministry that touches countless lives. The point is that trusting in God isn't just about surviving adversity. It's about coming out the other side stronger, wiser, and ready to bless others with the lessons you've learned. These 9 moves: prayerful surrender, daily reflection on God's faithfulness, faith-filled community, serving in the midst of your storm, speaking God's promises, consistent gratitude, courageous action, forgiveness, and believing in renewal, are not isolated steps. They form a lifestyle of trust. They reinforce each other. When you're praying, you remember to be grateful. When you're grateful, you find it easier to forgive. When you forgive, you're more open to community. When you serve others, you see God's faithfulness manifesting in real time. It's a beautiful chain reaction of spiritual growth, one that doesn't just bless you, but radiates out to everyone around you. I know some of you right now might be thinking, "This all sounds good, but you don't know my situation. You don't know how deep my wounds are." You're right. I don't know every detail of your life. But I do know that we serve a God who knows every hair on your head, every breath you take, every silent tear you've ever cried. And if He can lead me, a kid from Mount Vernon who stumbled more times than I can count, to the place where I speak hope into people's lives, He can definitely work a miracle in yours. That's not just wishful thinking. That's me standing here as living proof that God's strength is made perfect in our weakness. Let's pause for a moment. I want you to close your eyes if you can, or if you're listening in a setting where that's not possible, just quiet your mind. Ask yourself, am I ready to take even one of these moves and apply it right now? Maybe it's starting with prayer. Maybe it's writing down one way God has been faithful to you in the past. Or maybe it's reaching out to someone and offering forgiveness. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, and trust is built one decision at a time. If you decide to commit to these moves, you'll start to see a transformation in how you handle every challenge life throws at you. Fear won't dominate you. Worry won't consume you. Self-pity won't paralyze you. Instead, you'll notice a steadiness, a calm assurance, a sense that no matter what the external chaos is, there's an internal anchor holding you firm. And that anchor is your trust in God. People around you will see it too. They might ask, "Why aren't you freaking out like the rest of us?" And you'll be able to say, "Because I trust the one who's bigger than any storm." I may not know the details of tomorrow, but I know who holds tomorrow in His hand. I've seen families healed, businesses revived, communities transformed by these principles of trust. I've witnessed young people discover a sense of purpose beyond what they could have ever imagined, simply because they dared to believe that God is faithful. That's the power of this journey. It starts in your heart, but it doesn't end there. It spills out into how you treat others, how you envision your future, how you respond when things don't go as planned. It becomes a beacon of hope that lights the path for others who are still stuck in the dark. Now you might ask, Denzel, does trusting God mean I won't feel pain anymore? No, my friend. Pain is part of life. Even Jesus wept. Even the greatest heroes in Scripture knew heartbreak. But trust means that pain doesn't get the final word. Trust means you have a refuge, a strong tower, a light in the darkness. It means you don't camp in your sorrow. You walk through it, guided by the one who knows the way out. It's a process, a daily choice. And some days you might falter. Believe me, I have. But each time you come back to these 9 moves, each time you recenter yourself in God's promises, you strengthen your faith muscle for the next trial. I've traveled the world, met countless people from diverse backgrounds, and if there's one universal truth I've seen, it's this. The human spirit is built to hope, to believe, to reach for something beyond the visible. We crave purpose, direction, and assurance that our struggles aren't in vain. Trusting in God satisfies that craving like nothing else can. It provides an anchor for the soul that no amount of money, fame, or social status can replicate. That's why I stand here so passionately telling you about it. I've had success, accolades, recognition, but nothing compares to the peace I find in knowing I'm walking side by side with God, even when the road is rough. As we come to a close on this message, let me recap what we've just walked through together. We started by laying the foundation, learning how to surrender our burdens in prayer, reflecting on God's past faithfulness, and connecting with a community of believers who keep us accountable. Then we moved into more active demonstrations of faith, serving others right in the middle of our storms, speaking God's promises out loud, living in gratitude for even the smallest blessings, and taking courageous steps that show we trust God to lead us past our fears. We then touched on the liberating power of forgiveness, which breaks the chains of bitterness and lets God's love flow freely. Finally, we embraced the promise of renewal, understanding that adversity does not last forever, and that God can turn our darkest chapters into testimonies of hope and restoration. Each step fuels the next, creating a rich tapestry of trust that can guide us through life's toughest valley. Maybe you're feeling a stirring in your heart right now. Maybe you're ready to take these principles and run with them. Or maybe you're hesitant, unsure if you can really let go of your doubt. That's okay. Faith is a journey, not a single destination. The key is to start. God meets us where we are, no matter how shaky our first steps might be. I want you to remember that trust is not a passive resignation to fate. It's a living, breathing choice that says, I'm relying on God's character more than on my limited perspective. That trust lets you get up when you've been knocked down, helps you smile in the face of adversity because you know there's a divine plan unfolding. When you operate from a place of trust, you begin to interpret your life through the lens of possibility, not defeat. You start to see that every challenge is an invitation to go deeper in faith, to understand more of God's grace and power. I also want to remind you that none of us perfects these 9 moves overnight. We will make mistakes, we will doubt, we will slip back into worry. But every time we catch ourselves and realign with God's truth, we grow stronger. The more we practice these moves, the more they become second nature. And when adversity strikes again, and it will, we'll be equipped to handle it, not with despair, but with unwavering confidence in the Lord. Now, here's the part where I call you to action. You've heard me speak about these 9 dynamic moves. Take at least one and start applying it now. Maybe you need to begin with the simplest one, gratitude. Tonight, list 3 things you're thankful for and thank God for them out loud. Or perhaps you're ready to go straight for that leap of faith you've been avoiding. Submit that job application, forgive that person, start that support group. Whatever it is, don't wait for a more convenient season. Step into it. Speak it. Live it. Trust in God to sustain you as you do. I believe in you because I believe in the God who created you. And I know that if you commit to walking this path, you'll look back one day, maybe years from now, completely astounded by how far you've come, how many storms you've weathered, and how your trust in God was the key that unlocked doors you never even imagined existed. You'll be able to say, without a shadow of a doubt, that adversity was not your downfall, but your catalyst for greater faith, deeper wisdom, and a stronger testimony. That's my prayer for each of you, that you would leave this moment stirred, challenged, and inspired to place your trust in the only one who never fails. That you would embrace these 9 moves with all your heart and watch them transform the way you face trials. And that you would share what you learn with others so that your life becomes a beacon, a living example of what it means to trust God when every earthly reason tells you otherwise. Because that's how we ignite real change in our families, our communities, and ultimately our world, one heart turned toward God's promises at a time. As you step away from here, I want you to hear the echo of this truth. God has a plan for your life. Yes, you, sitting there with your doubts, your fears, your failures. He sees you. He lives you. And He's waiting for you to put your hand in His so He can lead you through the valley and onto the mountaintop. Will you trust Him? Will you dare to believe that the same God who shaped the stars in the sky has your story written in the palm of His hand? Will you open your heart to the possibility that the hardships you face today could become the testimonies of tomorrow? Friends, I encourage you with every fiber of my being. Say yes. Say yes to deeper prayer, to reflection on the past wonders God has worked in your life, to building or joining a community of believers. Say yes to serving others even when you feel depleted. Say yes to speaking God's promises with conviction and living in daily gratitude. Say yes to courageous steps of faith, to letting go of resentment, and to believing wholeheartedly in the renewal God promises. There is a beautiful freedom on the other side of that yes. You will discover that adversity need not break you. It can make you stronger, more compassionate, and more certain of God's unwavering love. So go, my friends. Go in faith. Go with hope. Go with a heart wide open to God's plans. Adversity will come, but it will not conquer you, because you are anchored in a power that is greater than any storm, deeper than any fear, and stronger than any chain trying to hold you down. Trust in God through your trials, and you will find that those trials become stepping stones, each one lifting you higher, bringing you closer to the destiny you were created for. And as you rise, you'll bring others with you, becoming a light that shines into the darkness, a testimony to the world that genuine faith in God can and will prevail. Thank you for allowing me to speak these words into your heart today. I pray they take root, grow, and bear fruit that blesses not just you, but everyone around you. Remember, trusting God isn't just something we do once. It's something we renew every day. So tomorrow, when you wake up, do it all again. Pray, reflect, connect, serve, speak life, give thanks, act courageously, forgive, and believe in the coming renewal. With each day that passes, you'll find yourself more grounded, more assured, and more ready to face whatever life may bring. May God bless you abundantly as you walk forward in faith and discover the fullness of His love and purpose for your life. And as I stand here, looking out at each of you, I can say with all sincerity, I believe in the greatness within you, because I believe in the infinite greatness of the God who made you. Now go, and let that trust light your path. Go, and never forget, God is with you every step of the way.